So again, we talked about some interesting malware that implemented Keylogger. We then showed how to write a simple keylogger. And now we're going to end by talking about how to generically detect these, which is something cool that I don't think people have really talked about a lot. But again, will be almost as easy as creating a keylogger. So we're going to kill this. We're going to create a new project. We'll call it Twitch keylogger key detector, event detector. Oh, I'm so indecisive. Logger detector. It's kind of long. Oh, let me drag this to another window. File, new Xcode project. Again, it's going to be a command line utility. Create. Okay. So our goal now is to generically detect these type of keylogger that are installed. And our goal is to have this running. This would likely be built into a defensive tool. So anytime a malware or a keylogger, a CG event type keylogger was activated, we would detect that notification. So again, I have some sample code for this, but we'll build the project much like we did with the other case. So start an Xcode project. Just hop over here. Make sure there's no more questions. And what we're going to do is we're going to basically enumerate any installed event taps. So there's the Apple API that can give you a list of event taps that have been installed. And then what we can do is we can register for a notification because the operating system actually broadcasts a notification anytime a new event tap is enabled. So while we're listening for this notification, if someone installs and activates a keylogger, our code will get an alert of that fact. So a very powerful capability to detect such keyloggers. Now I do want to caveat this is only for core graphic event tap based keyloggers. If you are doing some other keylogger, and there are other ways on macOS to perform keylogging, for example, you could write a kernel driver that interacts with the actual keyboard kernel extension that sits in the hardware stack. You could perhaps inject into a system process that's also handling key presses, but the vast majority of malware that has keylogging capabilities uses these core graphic event taps because they are simple and very powerful. So again, these are the ones we're going to detect. But again, just a caveat, our detector is going to be limited to detecting those kinds of events. So I'm just going to copy and paste some variables here. Again, we will explain all of these in a second. Let me just make this a little bigger. We basically are going to have a list of existing event taps. We're then going to enumerate current ones, and then we're going to diff that to see if there's any new ones that are created. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to generate a list of event taps. And we do this with the list taps function, which I've already written. I will show you this code in a second. It's pretty simple, but it has some extra logic to basically handle error conditions, build a nice dictionary for us, etc., etc. So let me import the necessary header files. Let's see if this compiles. Compile a lot because I have a lot of errors often in my code. Okay, what did we? Oh, okay, we'll add that in a second. Okay, hold on. Path for PID, that's another function I wrote that we need. Given a PID, it converts it to a path. So let's put that up here. And we'll walk through all of this in a second. Okay, so this built. It's funny, even though like it says Xcode succeeds, yeah, okay, the errors went away. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to enumerate any installed event tap. So if there's already a keylogger on your system, we will catch that with this. So if we jump to this method, again, this is a function I wrote, you can see that the core of it calls CG get event tap list. This is an Apple API. If we jump to its definition, it says this will give you an array of event taps. So fairly self-explanatory. Any event taps that have been installed, this API will return you a list of them. So again, pretty easy to detect that. So if we compile this, and run it on the system with the the malware, it should tell us about that fact. So let's go back to the VM, rerun that. Oh, come on, my trackpad sometimes gets stuck. Come on. Okay, there we go. Go back to the VM. We're gonna have to download again. That's okay. So bear with me wait a second. Cold root, download that. I don't know if this will capture the password. No, it doesn't look like it does, because on modern versions of macOS, they don't deliver passwords to this. So let's kill this. We're going to unpack this again because it's packed, because it actually doesn't run when it's packed. There's a bug, I think, in the packing code, which is kind of funny. So UPX-D, path to the malware, contents macOS, combat Apple. Okay, so now it's unpacked. We're going to run it from the command line, contents macOS, combat Apple. Okay, it's going to ask for a password, put in the password. Open a new tab just to make sure that private var temp. Yep, there's that Adobe log, which again, keylogging, less, no, we're going to tail it to follow it. Tail-F, Adobe log. We can see Keylogger is capturing. So now let's go back and let's see if our Keylogger detector can detect it. Hope this works. So let's run this. I don't know if we have to run this as root, but let's first run it not as root and see. Keylogger detector. Awesome. So we can see that it detected one keyboard tap, and we can see that the process is 10770. If we do a PS on that, we can see that that's the malware, again, combat-apple.driver. And we can see that our detector converted the PID to a path and basically says, okay, yes, this is the path to the binary that is doing the actual keylogging. And the target is set to 0. So let's go back really quick and talk about this. Yes, okay. Hopping over to comments. Josh said, of course, there are also hardware keyloggers. Very good point. If the user or the attacker has used a hardware keylogger, that's obviously not going to be detected by this as well. So again, jumping back to the code, what we did was we called the list-taps function, which is the function I wrote. In a nutshell, that basically just calls the event tap list. We first call it with null to get the number of events. We then allocate a buffer to get the information about all these taps. And then we invoke that again with the number that was given to us, which will then populate that. So that's a very common software API paradigm. If there's an API that returns you some amount of data, you often invoke it with 0 and null, and it'll tell you how much data you need. You then allocate that memory and then re-invoke the same API. So again, we're calling CG event get event tap list twice. The second time with the buffer that we allocated, called taps. And then that will contain a bunch of these CG event tap information, which is one for every event tap that's installed on your system. This is again defined by Apple. You can see the structure is used to report information about event taps. And you can see there's a flag if it's enabled, so we ignore it if it's disabled. We also see there's the tapping process. So that's the keylogger, the event, the process that's actually doing the tapping. And then there's the process that's being tapped. So you can tap a specific process, or if you remember over in the VM, the malware has a target process of 0. 0 maps to basically everything. So if you want to capture all keystrokes, whether I type in the browser, in text edit, wherever, you are going to specify a system-wide keylogger for when you register your event tap. So then our detector is going to report that the target is 0, meaning everything. So again, we've just generically uncovered that there's a keylogger on this system that registered a Core Graphics event tap. Here's the path to it, and also we now know it's targeting everything. Cool. So again, this code basically does a little bit of that. We process all the event taps. There was only one on this case. We ignore any of those that are disabled because I just don't care about those. We also ignore any non-key presses. So what we've done here is, again, there could be a event tap for mouse events. In this case, I don't really care about that. But you could also detect mouse event taps. What we do though is we say, hey, we're only interested in key up and key down events. So here then we basically check the event tap type. So again, it has this events of interest, which for mouse events will basically be set to mouse events, and for keyboard events will be set to these key events. It's a bit mask, so we have to AND that out, and we basically ignore any key event taps that aren't related to key presses. Because again, we're only interested in detecting Keylogger events. We then pass in the tapping process. This will be a PID to this method I wrote, which just converts a PID to a path, and then we print it out. So again, when we execute that, you can see that we got this nice information. So now let's talk about how to register for notification so that if we're already running and a keylogger comes along, we will capture that. So again, I've already written this code just for time reasons. And again, back to Xcode, we have now generated a list of taps. These are the ones that are already installed on the system by the time we run the tool. What we're now going to do is we're going to register for for new ones. So I'm going to cut and paste some code, make sure it compiles, and then we'll talk about what it does. So now what we're going to do is we're going to register for the KCG notify event tap added. This is a API, a constant that Apple defines. And it's actually interesting. If we go Google this, there's like 0 hits. I mean, there's a few, but they're not related to like keylogger detection. They're basically checking for, framework properly wrapped. So this doesn't seem like something that people are really talking about. There are some Russian, maybe the Russians are doing it. But no, it's just details about the core graphics library. You can see it is documented by Apple, but it really says no overview is available. So we basically are stuck reading the header file, which basically tells us when an event tap is installed or released, a notification is posted. So again, if we're writing a generic keylogger detector, this is exactly what we want. We basically want to be notified by the system anytime a keylogger is installed. But again, it's really kind of surprising that this hasn't been discussed more because who knows? But you would think that people would be interested in generic keylogger detectors. Maybe not. Maybe I should release such a tool. So what we do is we register for this. We use the notify register dispatch method. I'm not going to go through all these, but basically we say this is the one we're interested in, specifically the event tap added. And then once we specify this callback. So this is a block, and this is kind of like a callback function just inlined. So anytime and one of these keyboard notification events are added, this callback will be invoked. So again, what we do is we list the taps, and then what we do is we build a set and we subtract that with the existing ones to detect which ones are new. So if there's one that's already installed on your system, say it's some legit system process, when this notification occurs, it doesn't tell us what event tap has been installed. So what we have to do is we have to requery, again, invoking that API, which gives us the lists of the events. And then we basically diff that with our existing taps to see which one is new. And then if there's any new ones, we just print them out. And then we update current to new. So that we, the new ones to basically the older existing ones, so that we always have a current list. So this is just some extra logic to basically detect which of the event taps in the list are new. So if we compile this and run this, we should be able to detect when the malware installs its keylogger. So bear with me for a second. I'm going to kill the malware. It's installed as a launch agent. So launch control, unload, where does it install it? /library, library, launch daemons, com.apple, was it audio? Ah, okay. So now we've killed the keylogger and the malware. We are going to now come and rerun our keylogger detector, the new version, which hopefully will detect that. So let's run that in a new tab. Let's just make sure the malware is really gone. PS aux. Our keylogger will detect it if it's already running. So let's just run that. Again, I don't think we need root privs. Twitch keylogger detector. Okay, so it detected 0 existing keyboard taps, which is expected, right? There's just no keyloggers on our system. So now if we rerun the malware, fingers crossed, should have tested this, but I guess this is part of live streaming. We're going to load the keylogger and then come over here. Hey, it worked. Stoked. So we can basically see now, because we registered for that notification, the operating system called us to say, hey, just want to let you know, you asked me to let you know anytime a keylogger was installed. So I'm just letting you know that fact. So again, in our code, we got this notification. Again, the KCG notify event tap added because the malware added an event tap, which again is used for keylogging. We then re-enumerated all the installed event taps. Previously there was 0, now there's 1. We then put them in this set and we basically diff them, the old versus new, and then we were able to determine which event taps were new. So then once we had that information, again, for each event tap, it's going to be this block of, sorry, it's going to be this CG event tap information structure. So again, in that structure is the process that's doing the tapping, the process being tapped, which again is 0 for system, enabled, and other flags of interest. So all we do is we print that out and basically say, hey, just to let you know, an event tap has been added. But hopefully this illustrates to you, this is a fairly powerful capability. I mean, this is less than 100 lines. Oh, this is about 150 lines of code. I added a lot of comments in white space. So if we took this out, this is probably 100 lines of code. And it allows us to generically detect these core graphic-based keyloggers, which are in most malware and very, very common. So again, this is a very powerful technique because, for example, when this malware came out, it was not detected by any engines on VirusTotal because it was brand new. Not too surprising there. However, if we had this generic keylogger detector running and our system got infected with this malware, we would have been able to generically detect that. So again, this is why I like to write tools that look for malicious or potentially malicious activity versus ones that look for specific signatures. Because I don't care why someone, I mean, I do care when someone installs a keylogger, but I don't care specifically about the process, how it got on the system, all that stuff. I just want to know generically, hey, somebody enabled a keylogger, whether it's my boss at work, it's a piece of malware, or it's maybe some third-party application that's doing something fishy. So again, by looking for these heuristics versus specific signatures of the binary, we can often detect malware even if it's never been seen before. Woohoo. So that's pretty much a wrap for today. The surf is really good, so we're gonna skip the Q&A session because I'm gonna run and try to catch some waves before the sun sets. But again, just to reiterate, we talked about Coldroot, which was an interesting piece of malware that had some keylog capability. So again, you can grab that from the Objective-C malware page, or if you want to read more about it, this blog's from earlier this year. We then, oh yeah, Havana. Havana got to make an appearance. I brought some treats because otherwise she's sleeping. Come here. Come here. So this is always the most exciting part of So we wrote a little bit about, well, we talked about a little bit about some malware. We talked about how you can reverse engineering, again, using Hopper, look for those core graphic APIs. Then we showed how to write a simple keylogger. Again, the code for that is in the sniff MK project. You can also use this to analyze malware or applications that are generating synthetic events. So again, it's not a purely offensive tool. It's one that is both defensive and them. Hey, it's a granola bar. It's human human edible. and and then finally, man, are you pal? Are you done? She's like, I'm gonna go back to sleep. And then finally, we talked about how it's actually not that difficult to create a keylogger detector that can generically detect that. So I briefly mentioned I work at Digita, and one of the things we're doing at Digita is we're creating an open source monitoring framework that will listen for all sorts of events and activities that you can then subscribe to in code. It's a framework, and also write rules against. So one of the things I'm working on this week is porting this Objective-C code into that framework so that then if you link against that framework, which will be open source and I believe MIT licensed, so very friendly to use in other products, you can very easily add the ability in your own products to detect if a keylogger has been installed, or more specifically, if someone has installed an event tap. So again, I think a very good capability to have, especially because a lot of malware these days has some keylogging capability. So again, if you can generically detect that, that might be a way for you to uncover previously unknown malware. All right, so thanks again for joining me. Super stoked. Sorry about the audio problems at the beginning. Join me every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Again, thanks to the friends of Objective-C. And make sure you follow me on Twitch so you can get notifications and updates. Thanks also to GamerBot for being my incorruptible mod. Really appreciate that. And if you love what I'm doing, feel free to check out the research on Patreon as well. So again, thank you so much for joining. This has been super fun. I hope you guys have as much fun as myself and Havana. And I will hopefully see you all next Tuesday. So thanks again. Aloha and goodbye.